This is me, Eugene, your host. We have a very special guest today with me, Charles Hoskinson. And if you guys did not know this guy, should read more about it. Go check out all our past videos, because I think if there's any one person that I would put my hand on my heart and say has the wisdom to bring this entire ecosystem into the next generation, it will be this man here. If you manage to finally catch up with you today, I want to find out a bit more about your thoughts on the market, share some of your philosophy, which you did on stage, and I managed to get some good recording. But in times like this, when we're looking at the bear market and everyone's just getting so depressed, to me, it seems like a good reset, like a good wipeout. And you also mentioned something about it. There's no way you could remove greed from the whole equation. What's your thought on moving forward with this?
With all ecosystems, you have ups and downs, and what they do is they tend to weed out the weak. We saw this in the internet's rise. We see this in the rise of oil. Anything that's actually valuable and human beings are there. When people realize, oh, there's money and power to be made, then everybody rushes in. But to survive long term, you have to be tough, resilient, and great vision, a good philosophy, and good people. So this is no different in the cryptocurrency space, and we've gone through several of these cycles before. Watched it go from 30 to 1 to 4 or 5, then up to 250, and then from 250 down to like 40 or 80, I can't remember, and then up to 1200, then down to 250. And it goes, and these are the cycles, and this is no different. So if we move beyond that, the key to survival, I think, is having a great close-knit community that understands the philosophy, they believe in the vision, and they have a long time horizon, 3 to 5 years minimum, maybe longer. And there are good principles behind that community, in that there's no leader, everybody's empowered at the bottom to contribute and do things. And most of the people who end up doing the great things hire themselves. They actually go out and create stuff, and they don't ask permission, they just go and do it. And then people say, wow, that's a lot of value, let's go invest in that and keep it going. And then over time you end up building a very resilient ecosystem that's capable of surviving long term. We saw that with Linux, we saw that with BitTorrent, we see that with good governments and so forth.
One of the things that you mentioned was, and I think this is very pertinent right now, because the Bitcoin Cash fork. There was a Bitcoin fork to Bitcoin Cash, and the Bitcoin Cash is had a fork to SV and ABC. A lot of people think that fork is not necessary and is detrimental to the ecosystem, but you felt contrary to that, because every single tribe has its own philosophy, and a fork is necessary, and we are definitely not seeing the last of it.
Right. Well, some forks are irreconcilable, and they're necessary. I would argue that the fork with Ethereum and Ethereum Classic is an example, because either you believe in one philosophy or the other, and it's like abortion versus abortion or something. It's like there's just not going to be agreement there. It's going to happen or it's not going to happen. Other forks are just forks that are just blatant greed, or people just can't get along with each other because there's ego, and ego is running the ecosystem. And I'd argue that the ABC SV issue is probably that. Craig Wright is a horrible human being. I walked out of his presentation in Rwanda, and it just blew me away, because I like Roger Ver, and I think that there are legitimate reasons to be a big blocker or like SegWit, and I can understand both sides, and I can understand why they got to where they're at. But then they welcome in with open arms a person who gains his legitimacy only by claiming to be a Satoshi Nakamoto, refuses to provide any evidence for it, and everything he said has been a lie or wrong or in some way with an asterisk behind it. And then they use this guy until it turns out that he's crazy. It's kind of like The Dark Knight, where they welcome the Joker to get rid of Batman, and they don't fully understand who the Joker is or the consequences of this guy. And now they're dealing with it, so they're reaping what they sow. And I hope that they clean it out. But those types of forks are just examples of where you have bad governance at the top, and there's a flushing that needs to happen. And once it happens, you can move on and be stronger. Or in some cases, it kills the project.
It's also interesting, because that segues to the next topic I want to talk about, where you talk about the incentive behind the regulations, or rather the incentive behind the governance, because projects all start off very nicely, or hunky-dory, kumbawa, sitting around with good friends, and then when the incentive somehow sort of tarnished the relationship and the power struggle, because you came from that era it's hard to talk about you without talking about Ethereum at one point in time. So what you have started off from that, you had your opinion, very strong opinion, there was a split, and then Ethereum is where it is now. Is there anything that you said back then and now you would go, yeah, see, I told you so?
Well, I mean, I think I was right. Ethereum is one of the cases where both sides were right. No one can deny the success and the magic that Vitalik's delivered to the marketplace with Joe's help and others, and congratulations for that. But my whole argument was that if no one has an incentive to stick around, they're not going to stick around. And of the 8 founders, 7 of them left. So there's only one left actively working on the project at the foundation. That's Vitalik. And so my whole argument is don't pay people up front, vest them, and get them all locked down into an entity, and make sure everybody's incentives are identical. Now we have competing organizations. We have Consensus, and we have Decentral, and we have Parity Tech. And in a lot of cases, these guys eventually are probably going to end up working on competing products or projects because they can make more money, or they have investors with commercial demands that are separate from the Ether demands. So my argument was start the for-profit, bias it towards the appreciation of Ether and the growth of that ecosystem, and then once the protocol's done, go ahead and do an ICO with a foundation with a separate board, and then you kind of like setting up Consensus before setting up the Ethereum Foundation. I felt that it would have had a much better outcome. All of the founders would still be together. Imagine if IOHK and Consensus and Parity and Decentral were all in one family and
So
one
strong.
company. That'd be a pretty big company and a very prominent company instead of us all being at each other's throats. But, it is what it is. And, I wish them well, and I'm glad that they've had a lot of great success, and I'm glad that the ecosystem's gotten to a certain point. But in general, abstracting your question a bit, you always have to look when you want to predict the future, well, what incentives do people have to behave in a particular way? If you set up a particular government or corporation, you say, well, if I give Bob or Alice this control or these incentives, how will I predict Bob or Alice are going to behave if they're rational in 12 months or 24 months or 36 months? And where you have to pay a lot of attention to is conflict. When Bob and Alice are touching the same thing, and at some point in the future, if Alice gets something, it comes out of Bob's pocket, or vice versa, that's probably a point where you have to think really carefully about that structure and say, well, do I really want that structure, or can I build something better where they don't have that conflict?
And this is also, again, it's interesting because IOHK runs, I would say, pretty much the only one, or the most prominent one in the market right now that does things very differently from the hype that you see or the trends going forward in the market. We see IOHK and predominantly Cardano in this sense going for peer-to-peer reviews, trying to do the scientific approach from the engineering angle, like taking things really, really, really slow. And this is not something you see in the market because the market now promotes the hype. We talk about great marketing skills, or God forbid, even taking the example of Ethereum, you have just, if Vitalik puts his name on anything, suddenly becomes the golden boy.
Right.
So this again goes very against the grain of what IOHK represents, right? Having that kind of hype mindset.
Right. I mean, if you look at all of our papers, we've written more than 40 of them. My name's not on any of them.
Yeah.
Kind of like the anti-Vitalik in that respect. Everybody looks to Vitalik to solve Casper and Plasma and figure out the future. What I do is I look to my scientists, and these people are from all over the world. I mean, Ouroboros as a product has been touched by probably a dozen universities and more than 24 professors and graduate students and postdocs in some capacity. And each and every one of them has made meaningful contributions, if maybe a small or sometimes large contributions to the evolution of that protocol. So I think the key to running a great company is to empower people at the bottom to have a voice and give them the chance to actually have their own little thing to be a king of. So that's our philosophy at IOHK, is run the company in a decentralized way. We operate in 16 countries with 160 people, and try to keep it small, but it keeps growing. And we try to empower people to have an opinion and allow them to dominate within that field they're in. The other thing is that peer-reviewed research is great because it, in a way, depersonalizes everything. For example, the peer review process is double-blind. When we submit papers, there's no names on them. And the reviewers, we don't know who's reviewing it. It's the conference committee that we submit to. Now people say, oh, that's too slow, but I mean, contrast Ouroboros' development with Casper's. They've been at it a year longer than we have, and I'd argue we're actually ahead of them. We started with what is ledger? We created the secure ledger definition, was GKL 15, and then we said, all right, well, can proof of stake create that like proof of work can? And then we said, well, how do we make it practical? And every single paper is a step forward. It's not a regression where we have to throw the whole protocol away and start over again. And now we're starting to get into the nuances of like spikes of dishonest majority and tinkering with the clock mechanism and sharding. And every one of those papers is making substantial progress towards that. So I think process matters a lot, and I think peer review can help that process because it gives you checkpoints in the evolution of the protocol where you get third-party certainty that what you've done is correct from people who don't have a financial stake in whether that's correct or not, which is super important for the investors. It's super important for people participating in the ecosystem. It's no longer, I trust Charles is brilliant, or Vitalik is brilliant, or Dan Larimer is brilliant. It's, the academic community, which has been around a lot longer than the cryptocurrency community, has looked at this work and said there's merit to it, so much so that they're willing to actually allow it to be published or allow it to be presented at a conference. That's a huge step forward, and it's something that we should demand of all projects, not just Cardano or things IOHK does.
Because the white paper these days is putting the cart in front of the horse, right? You make promises first and then, well, we hope we can deliver.
Right, and then they'll just use all the buzzwords like MPC or zero knowledge and scalability, and it's like, great, but what in particular are you actually doing there? How will you accomplish that, and who's looked at that and actually knows what you're doing is reasonable? Like, has a domain expert looked at this and said this is fine? Like, if you look at distributed systems theory, it's easy to build a system that performs at a few hundred TPS or even a few thousand TPS, but there's all kinds of things you have to do and sacrifices you have to make to go beyond those performance thresholds, which have been known since the 1980s. So we saw things like EOS say, 500,000, or a lot of these projects say 500,000. Yes, on your laptop with a single node, you probably can simulate this type of performance. But the minute you put a real network in and Byzantine nodes in, you'll see massive variations in those types of numbers. Now, this is a known thing for people who've been studying this field for a long time. So the whole point of the peer review process is to take it and put it in front of people who are skeptical, people who have been doing this for a long time, and then convince those people that you have something new and revolutionary. But what's happened is instead, because that process is not being followed, you have a lot of people that have no formal training in these topics reinventing the last 30 or 40 years of computer science and running into the exact same mistakes that have been made in the 1970s and 80s and 90s and 2000s. And they're not aware of these mistakes because they don't have the training or they've never participated in that type of process. So what we try to do is blend these two things together, where we say, look, we do have to ship products, we do have to move quickly, but at the same time, we do need to make sure we get some checkpoints in that process to get independent validation of what we've done is correct. So you do that through security audits like with Kadelsky, we do that through peer review. But by the way, peer review in computer science is much faster than peer review in physics or mathematics. Normally you submit and it takes a year to a year and a half to get a paper out with a normal field of science. Computer science, there's a conference every 2 or 3 months that's pretty prominent you can submit to. So it really doesn't slow you down that much to follow this type of structured thinking. It also forces your scientists, your engineers to kind of agree on a milestone and say, all right, well, this is Ouroboros, this is Ouroboros Praus, this is Ouroboros Genesis. And when you do that, you have much better project management because you can look at the world in terms of, well, in the next 6 months, what can I get done? Instead of these endless stretch goals that just go on and on and on, and they're very elastic and they're very circular conversations, and a year later you've made no progress or something like that. So in a way, it focuses you. It's fast enough that I don't think it slows us down. And furthermore, it provides independent review that what we've done is right. It doesn't violate basic laws of computer science or other things. Just as a funny side story, I remember when I was having a debate with Vitalik on Reddit and Twitter, he said we were violating the FLP impossibility theorem. Because he obviously just can't understand how we were handling the synchronization and all of those papers there. And it's like, Vitalik, what you're basically saying is we've gone to 3 major academic conferences claiming we have Byzantine persistence at this level, and then something every single undergraduate, graduate student in this field would know we violated that. Something so obvious. It was just so unbelievable to me that that's the mentality that certain people have and the utter lack of respect that some people have for this process and what this process does. If you look at the peer review rounds that we've had, they ask very deep, very detailed, very mercurial questions, which are extremely difficult to answer, and they're very particular. And these are coming from people who have decades of experience in these fields who don't care whether we're Cardano or IOHK or if it's Agalos Gasis who's reading the paper. They don't give a crap. They say, no, you're saying that you have X, and I'm skeptical about that. Explain this to me. And if you can't satisfy me, I click reject on the peer review, and then your paper doesn't get into the conference. So no one is doing that at the moment for Casper or for EOS or for these types of projects. They're kind of ignoring the value of that entire system and saying, oh, well, we'll put it up on GitHub, and if somebody has a problem, they'll have a Git issue. Great, I can submit one, but then you could just not take it seriously or wave your hand off, and I have no power in that relationship. I can't like stop Casper from being implemented or reject your paper. You're just going to keep doing it, and you have this huge cult of personality. And when we published Genesis, within 5 minutes, Vitalik went to the Reddit thread and said, "Oh, it's wrong. The paper's wrong." How do you read a 60-page technical paper with lots of math in it in a 5-minute period and come to a value assessment of that? I don't care if you're Terrence Tao looking at some proof. It takes more than 5 minutes, and it's just blatantly disrespectful, and it just shows you he doesn't think too highly of us. But anyway, it's not the game we're playing, and ultimately we run in different circles, and we feel that I would much rather go with a 400-year-old process that's given us the planes, trains, and automobiles and modern medical science than this new, bizarre crypto anarchy, let's just rip everything down and hope it's right, feel-good philosophy we've seen over the last few years in our space.
No, this makes total sense. It's almost commonsensical.
Right.
Right?
And not here, not in this space.
Right? It's almost like destroy, just do. It's almost like going against the grain for the sake of going against the grain.
Right.
So what I want to find out is, Charles, like, how do you go to sleep at night? You have this very strong philosophy, and I agree with that. And then to see everything else around you burning down in flames, ICO market, BitConnect, like, how do you get by?
You just wake up every day and you got work to do that day. You got things you got to accomplish. I worry about Cardano, and I worry about IOHK, and I worry about Ethereum Classic and our portfolio, and we have work that needs to get done every single day. And you just accept that some people are just going to be crazy. On Twitter, everything I do, I go to Mongolia and open up an entire marketplace. We're the first cryptocurrency major company to go there. Talk to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the equivalent of the SEC for the Financial Regulatory Commission. Talk to all the business leaders, got ADA listed on exchange, and half the people on Twitter are saying it's a vacation, and I just went there to ride camels. Guys, it's not easy to go deal with the traffic of Ulaanbaatar. I've gone to 30 countries this year, and you just deal with it. You deal with the brutality of it. It's nothing new. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had strong disagreements with his general, and the general quit and ran against him in the 1864 election. Can you imagine that? One of your employees tries to fire you, And so it's like every generation, every movement, anything you do that has money and power and people involved, you're going to have noise and controversy. And so you just have to ignore all of it. You have to say, I believe in the vision, the principles, and the things we're going to do. And we're going to just go get it done, and you try to sort it out. Now, there is a caveat. There are existential issues in the space, and things like EOS and BitConnect, I think, cause these problems for different reasons. BitConnect is an outright scam. There was never an intention to ship a product. EOS is an example of greed and stupidity. So in the case of BitConnect, it shows the moral failings of our industry as a whole. When exchanges were still willing to list it, people were still willing to trade it, people were boosting it just because they could make money, not caring that money was coming from the retail investors. That's a guarantee to wake up the regulators and have them come in and have a very negative view of all of us, not just BitConnect, but everybody in the entire industry. In the case of EOS, it's just the logical extreme of ICOs. They realized that people were raising money with no strings attached and no fiduciary moral obligations, and they said, me too, and they were just really good at doing it, and they raised $4 billion. And again, that encourages the regulators to come in and just say, I guess everybody in the industry is corrupt because no one's denouncing them and no one's saying what they've done is wrong or they should have done things differently. So I think as an industry leader, you have to worry about existential problems and speak out against existential problems when it becomes clear that these can harm everybody. It was the same with IOTA when they attacked the DCI, and they said, the audit that they did was biased and threatened to sue the researchers. I said, if they sue the researchers at MIT, I'll pay their legal fees. Because I consume security auditing. I consume peer review. And if people in the academic world start believing that if they say negative things about my cryptocurrencies or the work we do, that I'm going to sue them, they're just not going to do it, which means it cuts me off from the academic world, and it prevents all cryptocurrency ventures from working with them to build better protocols and products. So I think the leaders in the industry have a moral obligation to make sure that they speak out against events that occur that either reduce our ability to do business or, in some cases, harm a large group of retail investors.
No, I hear you. I think the world needs to hear this as well. And this sort of mindset and belief has got to be more mainstream rather than the kind of greed mindset we have now. I consider you a visionary. And I think these problems, these existential problems that you talk about, they're not going to go away anytime soon. Like, what's your view on the next year, the next 3 years? Like, what do you think is going to hit us next? Like, based on what you're seeing, based on the behavior, the mechanism, the ugly side of nature, what's going to be the next thing that hit us blindsided?
I just think we're going to have to clear what happened in 2017 and before. I mean, there's going to be a large regulatory crackdown on the ICOs that were done, and the SEC has been incredibly systematic and transparent about it. People are complaining, oh, we don't know what they're going to do. It's like, guys, they've been telling you. They've the Dow report, and then they've worked from that, and basically it's gotten to a point where the footnotes are copy-paste in all their rulings. So I think we're going to see a large-scale crackdown, and they're going to do kind of a cookie-cutter enforcement on dozens, if not hundreds, of ICOs that have been done, and then they're going to cherry-pick some large offenders and really put the thumb screws on them. We're probably also going to see some really big pain points at the exchanges and the people who are involved in handling retail investor money. So in those cases, there's insider trading. In those cases, there was some market manipulation and these types of things done. And those will probably be heavily scrutinized because it's low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to prove. It's very easy to see mathematically and through transitive communication like emails and these things that people were trading based upon certain patterns. And the minute something comes to security, all securities laws apply. So, and it's retroactive. It's not like, oh, it's a security now, it wasn't before. It was a security since the beginning. Yeah. So if there was insider trading or double dealing or these types of things, all that applies. And those are very strict penalties. And
people are being brought down already.
Exactly. Some people are already starting to face. And so I think that's what we're going to see, and it's just going to be a slog. It's going to be brutal. It's going to kill liquidity in a lot of marketplaces. It's going to dry up capital in certain places, and people will go to jail. But rightfully so. The market does need this because there was a paper from University of Pennsylvania School of Law called Coin-Operated Capitalism, and that paper showed that the top 50 ICOs of 2017, 75% of them were somehow fraudulent or scammed. They said things to investors which were just not true, and they're provably not true based on the source code itself. It's over a 100-page paper that went through this. So you can't have an environment like that taking people's life savings and expect that there's going to be a good outcome and that regulators are going to be hands-off. They're going to get very involved very quickly. There's also a lot of lack of tax compliance in this entire industry where people have made huge fortunes very quickly and they haven't paid their taxes on it. So if you're not going to piss off the SEC, you're going to piss off the IRS, right? So that's going to come down the pipe too, and a lot of people are going to have a rude awakening. The other thing is you have to understand there's layers of regulation in the financial ecosystem, like there's FinCEN and CFTC. So even if something's not a security, you still could be a money transmitter and have a whole life of difficulties there. Then there's the class actions that will come. So when these things lose value, the investors will try to recover their money. The first thing they do is they go to a lawyer. The lawyer says you have right of rescission and then sues you and so forth. So it's going to be tough times for a lot of these ventures. And I think that's the next major event. In terms of value appreciation, because that's something that takes value out of the market, something that brings value into the market, I think the STO revolution is really gearing up. I was recently in Malta at a conference there, 8,500 people. And there were like 20 different vendors talking about STOs, and there's a huge demand for it. A lot of institutional people are getting involved, and banks are getting involved. And those are regulated products, just like a security is. And so I think that's going to be the next driver that's going to bring a huge amount of money into the cryptocurrency space. Yeah. And then the other thing is once the market stabilizes, then you can have ETFs around the non-security, non-problematic assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and ADA. And then that institutional money will come in and through portfolio diversification will bring billions of dollars into the space. So markets need to clear. The ICOs need to be flushed out a little bit. Regulation's coming. But the STOs and institutional portfolio reallocations will probably pump the markets back up.
So the market is going to go back to a little bit more sane than before. Charles, before we say goodbye, this is for your fans out there, your community. Is there anything you want to say to them? A good shout out for them? You got 30 seconds.
Well, thank you for all the faith, love, and support, and I really appreciate it. And we have a lot of really cool, good things for Cardano coming. The Rust client is evolving at a rapid pace. 1.4 is almost done. Regression is currently underway, and that'll be here soon. Yoroi is going to get multi-sig and ledger support soon, and it's a great product. And we really look forward to the Shelley testnet, and we really look forward to decentralization smart contracts. Cheers, guys.
Well, that's Charles for you, Charles Hoskinson. My name is Eugene Tay. You're watching Rock the Block Live. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun.